The ICU lights flickered once. Then the doors locked with a flat, mechanical sound that did not belong in a hospital. Monitors kept beeping. Ventilators kept breathing for patients who could not. Somewhere down the corridor, a metal cart tipped over and did not stop rolling until it hit a wall. The nurse at bed 7 did not react like the others. While doctors froze and aides stared at their phones, she checked the room's exits, her eyes moving without hurry. She lowered a patient's bed an inch. She unplugged nothing. She wasted no motion. Over the intercom, a voice announced a floor-wide lockdown. No explanation. No timeline. Security would not answer their radios. People assumed she was just another ICU nurse, quiet, overworked, invisible. They were wrong. Night in the ICU did not feel like night anywhere else. There were no windows. Time was measured by monitors and medication schedules, not darkness. The light was always the same pale white, softened only by shadows beneath beds and carts. The floor was full. Every room held someone who could not breathe on their own, could not speak, could not move without permission from a machine. The air carried antiseptic, warm plastic, and the faint metallic scent of recycled oxygen. Ventilators whispered in rhythm. Heart monitors marked out lives in green lines and numbers. The nurse moved through it all without drawing attention. Her name badge said ICU nurse in block letters, first name only, no titles, no distinctions. Her hair was tied back tight, practical, already fraying at the edges from too many shifts. Her shoes were clean but worn thin at the heel. She checked a drip rate, adjusted a blanket, scanned a chart. She did not rush. She did not linger. Doctors passed her without looking twice. A resident brushed past, eyes glued to a tablet. A respiratory therapist nodded once and kept going. She blended into the machinery of the place, another necessary part that people only noticed when it failed. At bed 7, an elderly man lay sedated, chest rising mechanically. She studied his vitals longer than required. Not because they were alarming, they were stable, but because stability mattered. She lowered the bed slightly, aligning it with the wall rather than the door. The movement was subtle, almost invisible. Across the hall, a junior nurse whispered urgently to another. Family members waited in plastic chairs, clutching paper cups, eyes red and unfocused. Security made a slow pass at the far end of the corridor, 2 officers talking quietly about nothing important. The nurse at bed 7 finished her check and stepped back. She paused. Not visibly, not in a way anyone would notice, just long enough to listen. Hospitals had a sound when they were functioning correctly, a layered consistency. Tonight, something was off, not broken, not loud, just uneven. A door closing where one usually stayed open, a radio crackle that ended too quickly, the absence of footsteps where there should have been some. She logged the vitals, signed off, and moved on. Room by room, she worked the same way. She checked equipment connections with her hands, not just her eyes. She memorized who was where, which rooms had family inside, which patients could not be moved. She noticed which emergency carts were fully stocked, and which had been partially stripped by the previous shift. No one asked her why she was taking so long. Underestimation was its own kind of invisibility. Nurses were expected to be thorough. Quiet competence did not raise suspicion. It blended into expectation. At the central station, the charge nurse argued softly with a physician over staffing ratios. The nurse listened without appearing to. Words floated past her, short tonight, security's thin maintenance delay. None of it sounded urgent enough to anyone else. She checked the floor map taped under the desk. ICU East, 1 main corridor, 2 side corridors, 3 stairwell doors. Elevators required badge access after midnight. She traced the layout once with her eyes, then let it go. A call light blinked. She answered it. A woman in her 50s asked if she could get water. The nurse explained calmly that she couldn't, not yet, not with the breathing tube. She adjusted the woman's pillow instead. The patient relaxed slightly. Trust was currency here. She spent it carefully. Around 1:12, one of the hallway lights flickered. Just once. A quick dip in brightness, then back to normal. Most people didn't notice. The nurse did. She walked to the nearest supply closet under the excuse of restocking gloves. Inside, she checked a crash cart seal without breaking it. She repositioned a rolling stool so it blocked part of the doorway when closed. Anyone entering too fast would hit it. Anyone entering slow would have to move it. She returned to her rounds. At 1:20, security did not come back through the corridor as scheduled. At 1:27, the intercom chimed softly, just a test tone, no announcement. The nurse stopped mid-step, Others barely reacted. She waited 3 seconds. Nothing followed. She resumed walking. H. Earth rate unchanged. At 1:35, a resident complained that his pager wasn't getting signal. Someone joked about dead zones. The nurse did not join the conversation. She adjusted a ventilator alarm threshold instead, tightening it by a narrow margin. Preparation did not require permission. She passed the stairwell door near the nurse's station and tested the handle lightly. Locked. It should have been. Still, she noted it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. No signal. Just the vibration of a system alert, trying and failing to load. She silenced it without checking. By now, something had shifted in the atmosphere. Not panic, not fear, just tension that had not yet found a name. At the far end of the ICU, a cart tipped over. It was not loud. A metal clatter, contained by rubber wheels and linoleum. Someone cursed softly. An orderly righted it and laughed it off. The nurse watched from across the floor. The cart had rolled farther than it should have on a level surface, momentum without cause. She moved toward bed 7 again, adjusting her path so she could see down the longest corridor. The lights there seemed dimmer, though no one else commented. She took a position beside the patient's head, one hand resting on the bed rail. Her posture was relaxed. Anyone looking would see nothing unusual. She counted exits. She counted people. She noticed that one of the security radios sat unattended on the desk, its screen dark. Overhead, the ventilation system changed pitch. A subtle shift, but sustained. Then came the sound that did not belong. A flat, mechanical click echoed once, then again distant but synchronized. Magnetic locks engaging. The nurse did not move when the ICU doors S-eeled at both ends of the corridor. No one screamed. Not yet. The sound was too quiet, too clean. A second later, the overhead lights flickered. This time, everyone noticed. The nurse reached out and steadied the bed, not because it moved, but because grounding mattered. She lowered the side rail on the far side, giving herself access without blocking the corridor. The intercom crackled. A neutral voice began to speak, and in the stillness before panic took shape, the nurse at bed 7 was already adjusting her position just enough to see everything that mattered. No one was watching her. No one understood what she was preparing for. They assumed she was just doing her job. They did not know how wrong they were. The voice over the intercom cut out before finishing its first sentence. Static replaced it, a hollow hiss that lingered longer than a technical glitch should. Someone tapped the speaker grill as if it might respond to touch. Was that maintenance? A resident asked. No one answered him. The nurse stayed where she was. Bed 7's monitor continued its steady rhythm. She adjusted the 4-pump, more out of habit than need, keeping her hands busy and her posture neutral. People looked for confidence in moments like this. She gave them nothing dramatic, just calm. At the nurse's station, the charge nurse lifted the phone and pressed the internal line for security. She waited. Pressed it again. Her expression tightened, not yet alarmed, but irritated. "Security's not answering," she said. "Probably radio issues. Probably." The nurse moved away from the bed and walked the corridor, slow and unhurried. She did not go straight to the desk. Instead, she detoured past the medication room, the supply closet, the staff restroom. Each door was tested lightly as she passed. Locked, 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 normal after midnight. Still, she kept count. A family member stood up from a chair, confused. "Are we allowed to leave?" "Just stay where you are for now," someone told him. "They'll explain." The explanation did not come. The overhead light stabilized, but the tone of the ventilation system did not return to normal. Airflow was still moving, but it was uneven, as if certain sections were being throttled down. The nurse inhaled slowly through her nose, picking up the faintest change in pressure against her skin. She stopped at the far end of the corridor and looked back. From here, she could see almost the entire ICU floor. Beds aligned like stations, curtains half drawn, staff clustered near the center, instinctively gravitating toward authority and light. The ends of the corridor were emptier now. No security presence. No transport staff. Isolation forming without anyone naming it. She returned to the desk and quietly logged into a terminal. The system lagged. Her credentials loaded on the second attempt. She opened the floor status dashboard and scanned it quickly. 2 stairwells listed as secured. 1 elevator bank listed as offline. The other showed restricted access. No explanation codes. No timestamps. She logged out without saving anything. A junior nurse leaned toward her. "Do you know what's going on?" "No," she said truthfully. Her tone discouraged follow-up. At 1:46, a doctor tried to badge through the west exit. The light stayed red. He tried again, harder this time, as if force would matter. The door did not respond. "Okay," he said. "Louder now." "That's not right." Voices rose. Phones came out. Someone called hospital administration. Someone else tried an external line. Calls dropped after a single ring. Text messages failed to send. The nurse stepped closer to the west exit, positioning herself off to the side, where she could see the door and the reflection in its narrow window. She did not touch it. She listened. Behind the door was silence, too complete. Even at night there were usually sounds, distant carts, ventilation hum, footsteps echoing from another floor. There was nothing. She shifted her weight slightly and caught the charge nurse's eye, just long enough to register. "We should account for everyone," the nurse said, quietly, not a suggestion. A statement of fact. The charge nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. Everyone stay put. Let's make sure we have staff and patients accounted for." People began counting rooms, beds, names. The process brought focus. Anxiety turned into task. The nurse used the moment. She walked to bed 12, where a trauma patient lay heavily sedated. She checked restraints, tightened one strap that had loosened. She ensured the bed could be moved quickly if needed. She memorized the weight, the tubing configuration, the clearance through the doorway. At bed 15, a ventilator alarm chirped briefly. She silenced it and adjusted the sensitivity. Too sensitive, and it would cry wolf. Too lax, and it would fail when it mattered. She balanced it precisely. A soft thud echoed from somewhere beyond the ICU. Not loud enough to cause panic. Just enough to be heard. Someone laughed nervously. What was that? Probably construction, someone else said. Construction die. D not happen at this hour. Not without notice. The nurse finished her circuit and returned to the center. She leaned against the counter, arms relaxed, eyes forward. Anyone watching would see fatigue, not readiness. Inside, she was mapping timing. If the locks were intentional, they had been engaged floor by floor. If they were selective, someone had access to hospital systems. If security was offline, it was either overwhelmed or removed from the equation entirely. Neither option was good. At 1:58, the intercom chimed again. This time, it did not cut out. "Attention ICU East," the voice said. "Calm, measured, not hospital administration, not emergency broadcast. Remain where you are. This is a controlled lockdown." The word controlled hung in the air. Controlled by who? A doctor demanded. The intercom did not respond. The nurse did not look at the speaker. She looked at the faces around her. Fear had arrived now, settling in behind the eyes. People wanted leadership. They wanted answers. She gave them something smaller. "Check your patients," she said evenly. "Make sure everyone's stable." It was what she would say on any other night. People obeyed without questioning why her voice carried weight. As staff dispersed, the nurse moved once more to the edge of the corridor. She placed her hand flat against the wall, feeling for vibration. Nothing. No movement behind it. She exhaled slowly. Whatever was coming, it was deliberate, and it was not over. The doors sealed fully at 2:03. This time, the sound was unmistakable. A synchronized engagement of magnetic locks, louder than before, rolling down the corridor like a closing hand. The red indicators above each exit door. Illuminated at once. Locked. The ICU was no longer drifting toward isolation. It had arrived. A family member stood abruptly. "What does that mean? Why are the doors locked?" The charge nurse opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. She looked toward the nurse's station phone again, as if it might suddenly work out of shame. It did not. "We're in a temporary lockdown," she said finally. "Please stay calm." The nurse watched the word temporary land badly. People understood buildings. They understood fire alarms, evacuations, drills. Lockdowns were different. Lockdowns implied threat without explanation. The overhead lights dimmed by a narrow margin, almost imperceptible. The monitors compensated automatically, brightening their displays. The floor took on a sharper contrast, faces pale, shadows deeper. The nurse moved, not quickly, not urgently. She walked to the medication room and closed the door most of the way, leaving it unlatched. Inside, she repositioned a rolling cart so it aligned with the doorframe. If the door opened suddenly, the cart would stop it partway. She returned to the corridor and passed, a resident struggling with his phone. "No signal," he said to no one in particular. She nodded once and kept going. At bed 7, the patient's vitals remained stable. She adjusted the ventilator tubing so it rested closer to the bed frame, reducing slack. Loose tubing caught hands. Hands made mistakes. Across the floor, someone tried the emergency exit again. The door did not move. "This is illegal," the doctor said. "We can't be locked in." The nurse did not disagree. She did not agree either. At 2:07, the fire alarm panel near the nurse's station flickered. No alarm sounded. Just a brief status change before returning to green. She noticed. She was the only one who did. The intercom clicked. "ICU East," the same voice said. "Remain inside secured areas. Do not attempt to force exits." There was a pause, deliberate. Hospital security is unavailable. That was when the room truly changed. A nurse began to cry quietly. A family member raised his voice, demanding answers. A doctor swore under his breath and slammed a hand on the counter. The nurse raised her voice for the first time that night. "Everyone needs to lower their voices," she said. Not loud, not sharp, just firm enough to cut through. The sound level dropped, not because of authority, but because certainty was rare, and people reached for it instinctively. She turned to the charge nurse. "We should consolidate families to the center rooms, fewer corridors to manage." The charge nurse hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Okay, let's do that." No one questioned why the idea came from her. As people moved, the nurse stayed near the periphery. She watched the ends of the corridor, the reflections in glass, the subtle shifts in airflow. She counted footsteps. She tracked who was where. At 2:12, a security camera mounted above the west exit rotated slightly on its axis, just a few degrees, enough to change its field of view. The nurse felt the shift before she fully processed it. Cameras did not move unless someone told them to. She stepped closer to the wall and angled her body so she could see the camera's reflection in the glass of a supply cabinet. The lens adjusted again, slow and controlled. It was being operated remotely. The intercom spoke once more. "Do not interfere. With hospital systems." The nurse did not look up. She walked calmly to the nurse's station and leaned in toward the charge nurse. Her voice stayed low. "Someone has control of internal security," she said. "We should assume they can see and hear us." The charge nurse swallowed. "Who?" "I don't know," the nurse said. "But they're disciplined." That word mattered. At 2:18, a man in hospital scrubs appeared at the far end of the corridor. No one recognized him. He stood just inside the locked doors, hands visible, posture relaxed. He did not attempt to force entry. He did not speak. He simply waited. The nurse's eyes fixed on his shoes. They were not hospital-issued. The man raised his head and looked directly at the central station, at the cluster of staff and families. He smiled slightly. The nurse shifted her stance without anyone noticing, placing herself between him and the patients behind her. This was no longer a systems failure. This was intentional, and it had just crossed the line from remote to physical. The man at the end of the corridor did not move. He stood just inside the sealed doors, close enough for everyone to see him clearly now. Early 40s, clean-shaven, scrubs that fit too well to be hospital-issued. His posture was loose but balanced, weight evenly distributed, as if the floor beneath him mattered. Security training showed itself in the stillness. A doctor stepped forward. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. "This floor is locked." The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether the statement deserved a response. He did not answer. Instead, his eyes moved, slow, deliberate, across the room. He assessed faces, distances, exits, Hat no longer worked. When his gaze passed over the nurse, it did not linger. That bothered her more than if it had. She watched his hands, empty, relaxed, no tremor, no nervous movement. People under stress gave themselves away without meaning to. This man was comfortable. The intercom crackled softly. Not the same voice this time. "Please remain calm," a new voice said. Female. Measured. "A situation is being resolved. Cooperation will ensure patient safety." The man smiled again faintly as if on cue. A family member shouted, "Who are you people?" The man finally spoke. His voice carried without effort. "We're here to make sure nothing goes wrong." The words were wrong. Too vague. Too rehearsed. The nurse took one step forward, not toward him, sideways. She adjusted her angle, opening her field of view to include both corridor ends. She placed her back near a medication cart, close enough to feel its metal edge through her scrubs. Cover limited. Better than nothing. The charge nurse whispered, "Should we call a code?" "No," the nurse said quietly. The charge nurse looked at her, startled. "Why not?" "Because this isn't medical," she replied, "and alarms give people excuses." Before the charge nurse could respond, the man moved. Not toward the group. He turned and gestured to someone out of sight beyond the sealed doors. Footsteps followed. 2 more figures emerged into view, also in scrubs, also unfamiliar. One carried a tablet, the other wore a hospital badge clipped backward, the photo hidden. The nurse noted the spacing between them, not clustered, not careless. Each maintained a clear line of sight down the corridor. They were controlling space. The man with the tablet spoke, addressing the room. "We're going to conduct a brief check. No one will be harmed if instructions are followed." "What kind of check?" a doctor demanded. The tablet man did not answer him. Instead, he pointed toward the far rooms. "We'll start there." He nodded to the third man, who began walking along the corridor, slow and unhurried, peering into rooms as he passed. The nurse felt the moment narrow. If they were counting people, they were not here for ransom or chaos. If they were inspecting rooms, they were looking for something or someone. She glanced at bed 7. The patient lay motionless, oblivious. Tubes and lines webbed his body, harmless, unremarkable, good. The third man reached the first room and pulled the curtain aside. He leaned in, spoke quietly to someone inside, then moved on. The nurse stepped back half a pace, blending into the line of staff. She kept her hands visible. She did not challenge. She did not freeze. When the third man reached the medication room, the one with the repositioned cart, he tried the door. It opened only part way. The cart stopped it with a dull, controlled thump. The man frowned slightly and pushed again, harder. The cart rolled an inch, then caught on the doorframe. He cursed under his breath and bent to move it. That was the opening. The nurse crossed the distance in 3 steps. She did not run. She grabbed the cart handle with one hand and shoved, not at the man but sideways, changing its angle abruptly. The sudden shift forced him to step back to keep his balance. In the same motion, she reached out and slammed the medication room door closed with her shoulder. She locked it. The sound echoed louder than she in. "Tended." The corridor froze. "Hey," the man at the sealed doors said, his voice no longer pleasant. "That's not cooperation." The nurse stood still, one hand on the door, breathing steady. "There's a patient in there on restricted meds," she said. "You're not authorized." It was a lie wrapped in hospital language. Believable. Familiar. The tablet man stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Open the door." "No," she said. The word landed heavier than it should have. The man by the doors shifted his stance for the first time, his weight moving forward. Not aggressive, prepared. The nurse felt the tension spike around her. Staff stared. Someone whispered her name, confused. She did not look back. She looked at the man closest to her and met his eyes. "You don't want a scene in the ICU," she said quietly. "You don't want alarms. You don't want a tension you can't control." The man studied her now, really studied her. Something changed in his expression. Not fear. Recognition of resistance he had not anticipated. Behind them, a monitor alarm chirped, short, sharp. The nurse reached out with her free hand and silenced it without looking. The room took that in. The man by the doors raised a hand slightly. The others paused. "Fine," he said. "We'll come back to that room." He smiled again, but it did not reach his eyes. "You just made yourself memorable." The nurse released the door slowly and stepped back into the line. Her pulse had barely changed, but the cost had been paid. She was no longer invisible, and everyone in that corridor knew it. The men resumed their slow walk down the corridor, but the balance had shifted. They no longer pretended this was routine. The one at the doors stayed where he was, watching the group instead of the hallway behind him. The man with the tablet stopped making notes. He kept his device lowered now, attention narrowed, eyes tracking movement rather than rooms. They were recalculating. The nurse felt it the way she felt changes in air pressure, subtle but unmistakable. She returned to bed 7 and resumed her work. Adjusted a line. Checked her pressure reading. She did not look at the men again, not directly. She watched them through reflections in glass, in stainless steel surfaces, in the curved plastic of monitor casings, control without confrontation. The charge nurse leaned close. "What did you just do?" "Bought time," the nurse said. "For what?" The nurse did not answer immediately. She waited until a man in scrubs passed close enough that his footsteps were audible, then quietly to organize. The charge nurse followed her gaze, then nodded once. She trusted action more than explanation. The nurse moved deliberately through the ICU, speaking in low tones as she went. Not commands. Suggestions framed as patient care. Let's move non-critical families to rooms 4 and 5. Close the curtains on the west side. Keep carts against the walls, not in the corridor. No one questioned her now. People were scared. They clung to anyone who seemed steady. She ensured the center of the ICU became dense. Patients, staff, families clustered together. The periphery thinned. Long sightlines disappeared. Movement slowed, constrained. Containment worked both ways. The men noticed. The tablet man spoke softly into an earpiece. The nurse caught fragments as he passed, adjusting layout. Resistance localized. The nurse stopped. Ed, near the supply alcove, and pretended to inventory gloves. She angled her body just enough to hear better. No weapons observed. One staff member non-compliant. Non-compliant. She closed the glove box with care. At 2:31, one of the men entered room 9. It was a mistake. Room 9 held a post-operative patient with unstable vitals. 2 nurses followed automatically, voices tense, trying to explain protocols. The man ignored them, stepping closer to the bed, eyes scanning equipment rather than the patient. The heart monitor spiked. The nurse appeared in the doorway without running. He's unstable, she said. Calm, flat. You need to step back. The man turned. His jaw tightened. We're almost done here. Not in this room, she replied. You push him any further, he codes. The man hesitated. That was new. He looked at the patient, then at the nurse. He weighed something internal, risk versus objective. Fine, he said finally. He stepped out. The nurse closed the door behind him and lowered the blinds. That was the moment the staff began to follow her without looking for approval. Authority, when earned quietly, did not announce itself. The man at the sealed doors watched her now. Openly. He tapped his radio. Change of plan, he said. We consolidate. The nurse caught the word and adjusted instantly. She moved to the medication room door she had locked earlier. She unlocked it, opened it just enough to retrieve a syringe tray, then closed and locked it again. Inside, the man she had trapped earlier remained silent. She could feel his presence through the door. She had not forgotten him. She repositioned 2-4 stands near the corridor junction, narrowing the passage. Anyone moving through would have to slow, turn sideways. Speed was gone. At 2:38, the intercom came back on. This is your final instruction, the female voice said. Remain in place. Any further interference will compromise patient outcomes. The nurse looked at the speaker and spoke back, knowing she was being heard even if she wasn't supposed to be. You already are, she said quietly. The men stiffened. The one at the doors took his first step forward since the confrontation. He did not rush. He closed distance methodically, stopping just short of the clustered staff. You are making this harder than it needs to be, he said to her. She met his eyes. Then you chose the wrong place. He smiled thinly. Hospitals are perfect places. Only if you think people won't fight, she replied. The word fight hung between them. She had not raised her voice. She had not threatened. But the meaning was clear. He studied her again. Longer this time. You're not just a nurse, he said. She did not answer. Silence could be read many ways. She let him choose the one that unsettled him most. Behind them, the ICU hummed on. Machines breathed, hearts beat, life persisted, fragile and stubborn. At 2:44, something changed outside the floor. The ventilation system surged, then dropped. Lights dimmed further, emergency backups engaging with a low, resonant thrum. Red strips along the floor illuminated, bathing the corridor in muted color. The nurse felt the building shift under her feet. Power redistribution. The man with the tablet swore softly. They're isolating us. The man at the doors snapped his head toward him. Who? The nurse answered before either of them could stop her. The H. Hospital, she said. Or someone pretending to be. She watched understanding, spread across their faces. They were no longer in control of the environment. Someone else was moving pieces, and the men did not like losing control. The one at the doors made a decision. We're accelerating, he said. We take what we came for and go. The nurse's breath slowed, so there was something specific. She scanned the clustered patients again, her mind narrowing, filtering. Who would justify this level of intrusion? Who was critical enough to risk exposure? Her eyes stopped on a young man in room 16. Trauma admission, guarded prognosis, no visitors allowed. His chart had been amended twice tonight. She felt the answer settle cold in her chest. The man started moving toward that side of the floor. The nurse stepped into his path. "Don't," she said. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could smell antiseptic on his scrubs, layered over something metallic. "You can't stop this," he said. She held his gaze. "You're already behind." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Somewhere behind them, a door slammed. The locked medication room. The man inside had found another way out. The cost of containment had just come due. The sound from the medication room was not loud. That was what made it dangerous. A single heavy impact, metal against metal. Then a softer sound, like a latch giving way under steady force rather than panic. The nurse did not turn her head. She watched the man in front of her instead, the one blocking access to the east corridor. She saw his eyes flick, just once, toward the sound. Confirmation. Not surprise. He had expected this. Stay. "Where you are," he said to her, voice low. She did not move. Behind her, staff stiffened. Someone whispered her name again, louder this time. Fear had crested. It was looking for direction. The nurse spoke without raising her voice. "Everyone stay with your patients. Do not run. Do not follow." They listened. The man's jaw tightened. "You're out of position," he said. "So are you," she replied. The medication room door burst open. The man she had trapped emerged fast, breathing controlled, eyes already scanning. He did not charge, he did not shout. He assessed, then adjusted, angling himself to cover the central cluster while keeping distance from the walls. He had used the emergency ceiling release. Clean, efficient, 2 threats, coordinated. 1 objective. The nurse shifted her stance, just enough to widen her base. Her hands stayed visible, empty. She did not escalate. The tablet man spoke into his earpiece again, voice sharper now. "We're compromised. Subject likely room 16. Resistance active. Room 16. The nurse felt the final shape of the crisis lock into place. Room 16 held a young man admitted 6 hours earlier after a multi-vehicle collision. No ID at intake, no family, severe internal injuries, guarded but stable. His chart had been restricted by administration with no explanation. She had noticed, she always noticed, the man who had escaped the medication room took a step toward the east corridor. The nurse moved first. She did not block him head-on. She stepped sideways and reached for an enforce stand, pulling it down with a controlled tug so it toppled into his path. It did not strike him. It did not need to. It forced him to slow, to step wide. Ed denied. The man reacted instantly, kicking the stand aside. But the moment was enough. "Room 16 is non-transportable," the nurse said, loudly enough for all of them to hear. "You move him, he dies." The man at the doors laughed once, sharp. "That's not your call." "It is tonight," she said. The tablet man's device chirped, an alert. His eyes widened slightly as he read it. "They're rerouting elevators," he said. "Whole wing." The nurse caught the implication. External intervention. Not police. Not yet. Something quieter, slower, bureaucratic pressure closing in. The men felt it too. Pressure points were forming. Patients began to destabilize as the power fluctuations continued. One ventilator alarmed, another monitor flatlined briefly before correcting. The ICU demanded attention the way it always did, indiscriminately. The nurse turned away from the men and moved to the alarming bed. She silenced the alarm, adjusted settings, stabilized the patient in seconds. She did it deliberately where they could see. This was not a standoff in a hallway. This was a functioning ICU with lives tied to every action. "You do this here," she said without looking at them, "and you lose control fast." The man who had escaped the medication room raised his hand slightly, signaling pause. He spoke to the leader without breaking eye contact with the nurse. "She's not bluffing." Silence followed. The leader weighed options. The nurse saw it in his breathing, the micro-adjustments of his stance. He had planned for resistance. He had not planned for resistance embedded inside a system that punished violence immediately. He shifted tactics. "Fine," he said. "We don't move him. You do. The—" Nurse turned back to him slowly. "No," she said. "You wheel him out," he continued, voice calm again. "We escort. No one else gets hurt." "You don't understand," she said. "If I touch that bed, alarms trip you can't suppress. That's a risk we'll take." She shook her head once. You won't get that far. The tablet man swore again. They're locking stairwells now. We're running out of exits. The leader's eyes hardened. Then we take the corridor. That was the escalation. He nodded once. The man from the medication room moved toward the east side again, faster this time. Another followed, flanking wide. The nurse reacted without hesitation. She reached up and pulled the emergency oxygen shutoff, not fully, just enough. The change was immediate. Ventilators across the east wing alarmed simultaneously, loud, piercing, impossible to ignore. Chaos threatened to spill, but she was already moving. She turned the valve back open and started resetting alarms as she went, hands flying with precision. She stabilized the most critical patients first, moving in a tight, efficient loop. The men froze. They could not advance without causing catastrophic failure. They could not fire alarms. Again, without drawing attention, they could not control. The nurse finished and turned back to them, breathing steady. "That was your warning," she said. The leader stared at her, not angry now, impressed. "Who are you?" he asked. She did not answer. Behind her, a patient coded. The nurse turned instantly, calling for compressions, for meds, for help. The ICU snapped into motion, staff responding to her voice without question. She ran the code with absolute control. No wasted words. No panic. The putty. Ent stabilized after 90 seconds. The room exhaled. When she looked back up, the men had retreated several steps. They had just watched her choose patience over stopping them. They had just watched her sacrifice leverage to save a life. That changed the equation. The leader spoke again, quieter now. "You're making this impossible." She met his eyes across the distance. "That's the point." Outside the floor, something heavy moved through the building. Not footsteps, authority. The tablet man's device went dark. "No signal," he said. The leader closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them. Time was no longer on their side. And the nurse knew what that meant. Desperate men made mistakes, and mistakes in a hospital cost lives. The first mistake came quietly. The leader raised his hand, not to advance, but to signal withdrawal toward the east corridor. It was subtle, efficient. An attempt to reset, to regroup, to find another angle that did not involve collapsing an ICU in real time. The nurse saw it immediately. Withdrawal meant they had lost initiative. It also meant they were about to choose something riskier. She stepped forward one pace. Not chasing, not threatening, just closing space enough to matter. "If you move again," she said, "you won't get another chance." The leader stopped. The red emergency lighting cast sharp lines across his face now, flattening expression, stripping away the practiced calm. For the first time, he looked like a man calculating loss rather than gain. "You're betting everything on procedure," he said, "on rules." "No," she replied. "On people." She gestured slightly, to the ICU behind her. Nurses working without waiting to be told. Doctors trusting her judgment without demanding credentials. Families staying where they were because someone sounded certain. The system was no longer neutral ground. It had chosen a side. The man who had escaped the medication room shifted his weight. He was watching the nurse differently now, not as an obstacle, as a threat. "You trained," he said quietly, "not a question." The nurse did not answer. She felt the weight of the next decision settle on her shoulders. Room 16 lay at the end of the east corridor. Behind one locked door was a patient who mattered enough to justify all of this. She knew that if the men reached him, they would not hesitate. They would sedate, disconnect, move fast. Whatever his condition, it would not slow them. Stopping them meant escalation. Escalation in an ICU meant consequences that could not be contained. The leader spoke again, voice stripped of pretense. "Last offer. You walk away, we take him, everyone else stays alive." The nurse looked past him down the corridor to the patients who would suffer if this turned violent. She felt the pull of it, the temptation to end it quickly, to accept one loss to prevent many. She had made choices like that before. She remembered how they stayed with you. "No," she said. She reached up and pulled the badge from her chest. Not to show it, to remove it. She set it gently on the counter beside her. "I'm not a nurse right now," she said. "I'm the person standing between you and that bed." The leader exhaled slowly. "That's a mistake." She nodded once. "Yes." She turned her head slightly and spoke to the charge nurse without taking her eyes off the men. "When I say go, you lock down the center rooms. Hard. No exceptions." The charge nurse swallowed. "What about you?" The nurse did not answer. She took 2 steps backward, toward the east corridor, toward room 16. The men moved instantly to intercept. The nurse dropped, not to the floor, down onto one knee, sliding behind a crash cart she had positioned earlier. She yanked it sideways, slamming it into the corridor junction. It blocked the passage almost completely. The men swore. One tried to shove it aside. It barely moved. She came up on the other side, already moving. She reached room 16 and keyed the override on the door. It opened with a hiss. She slipped inside and sealed it behind her. Inside, the room was dim. The patient lay unconscious, pale chest rising shallowly. Tubes everywhere, bruises blooming across his torso. She moved fast. She checked his lines, his sedation level. She adjusted his ventilator, deepening support just enough. She disconnected the bed from the central monitoring network. Alarms went silent. Outside, fists struck the door. "Open it," the leader shouted. She ignored him. She reached for the wall panel and activated the room's isolation protocol. Negative pressure engaged. Manual override. The door locks reinforced. The men were now shut out. "You can't stay in there," the leader said through the door. "You're sealing yourself in." "Yes," she said. She pulled a chair over and wedged it under the door handle, not because it would hold, but because it bought seconds. Seconds mattered. The patient's heart rate spiked. She steadied him, murmuring without thinking, words meant for people who could not hear. She leaned close to his ear. "They're not taking you," she said quietly. "Not tonight." The leader's voice changed. "Do you know who he is?" he asked. "Yes," she said. That surprised her. The word came out before she had fully processed it. She did know. She had known the moment she saw the chart restrictions, the intake anomalies, the way the men moved. The patient was not just a victim, he was an asset or a liability. The leader tried another approach. "You're sacrificing yourself for someone who won't remember you." She smiled faintly. He could not see it. "I'm not doing this for him." The door shuddered as they tried again. Outside, the charge nurse's voice rang out. "Now!" Metal slammed. Central room locks engaged. Families and staff sealed off, safe but isolated. The ICU fractured into compartments. The nurse checked her watch. Time. She reached under the bed and pulled out the emergency oxygen tank she had stashed earlier. She attached it, switched supply. Then she did something the men had not anticipated. She shut down the room's power. Darkness swallowed the space. Only the portable monitor glowed faintly. Outside, the corridor erupted in confusion. What did she do? Someone shouted. "She killed the room," the tablet man said. Panic edged his voice. "We've lost environmental control." The leader swore. In the dark, the nurse sat beside the bed, one hand on the patient's wrist, counting beats manually. She waited, because she knew something they did not. Hospitals did not stay quiet when systems failed. They screamed, to the outside world, to redundancies, to people whose job it was to notice. She had crossed the line. She had trapped herself on the wrong side of the door, and she had done it knowing exactly what it would cost her. Her Joe. Her freedom. Possibly her life. The pounding on the door stopped. Footsteps retreated. Then, faint, but unmistakable, came the sound she had been waiting for. Not sirens. Boots. Measured. Heavy. Multiple. Approaching fast. The leader's voice came through the door one last time, tight and controlled. "You just ended this badly for everyone." The nurse closed her eyes briefly. "No," she said. "I ended it." The boots stopped outside room 16, not abruptly, not with urgency. They stopped the way professionals stopped, when they reached the exact point they intended to reach. The nurse did not move from her seat beside the bed. The portable monitor continued its quiet rhythm. The patient's pulse was steady under her fingers. Oxygen flowed cleanly from the auxiliary tank. Outside the door, voices spoke in low tones, not raised, not confused. "Clear, confirm isolation," one voice said. "Confirmed," another replied. "Negative pressure active. Manual override engaged from inside." A pause. Then the leader's voice cut in, sharper now. "You're too late. The asset is compromised." No one responded to him immediately. The nurse listened, cataloguing accents, cadence, authority markers. These were not hospital security. They did not move like police either. Their presence pressed down on the space with quiet weight. "Step away from the door," a new voice said. It was calm, unemotional. It did not need to repeat itself. The leader laughed once, thin and humorless. "You know what this is. You know who he is." "Yes," the voice replied. "And you're done." There was a brief sound, metal against floor, weapons being lowered, not raised. The nurse closed her eyes for one breath. The door disengaged. Light spilled into the room as the door opened partway. She shielded the patient's eyes instinctively, then looked up. Two figures stood just inside the doorway. Not in scrubs, dark jackets, no visible insignia. Their posture was relaxed, but their eyes missed nothing. Behind them, the men in scrubs were already on the floor, hands zip-tied, faces pressed to linoleum, efficient, no shouting, no resistance. The leader met the nurse's gaze over a shoulder. For the first time, there was no calculation left in his expression, only understanding. One of the newcomers stepped into the room. He glanced at the portable monitor, the oxygen tank, the manual setup. "You kept him stable," he said. "Yes," she replied. "You shut down a live ICU wing." "Yes." "You knew that would trigger external escalation." "Yes." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded once. "That was the correct call." He turned and spoke into his radio. "Secure the patient. Medical continuity remains under her authority." The word authority landed quietly. Two more figures entered, moving with practiced care around the bed. They did not touch anything without looking to her first. When they adjusted the patient's position, they matched her pace. One of them paused. "We can take over from here." She shook her head. "Not yet. He's still fragile." They deferred immediately. Outside, the ICU began to reawaken. Power returned in stages. Environmental systems normalized. Alarms chirped and then fell silent as controls were reset. The nurse stood slowly, joints stiff now that the crisis had passed. The cost arrived all at once. Adrenaline drained, leaving weight behind. The man who had spoken first looked at her again. "You should step out." She hesitated, then nodded. She removed the chair from the door, powered the room back up, and guided the transition like any other handoff. When she stepped into the corridor, the floor looked different, not damaged, changed. Staff stood in small clusters watching. Some recognized her now, others looked away, unsure what they had just witnessed. The charge nurse approached, eyes wide. "Are you—" "I'm fine," the nurse said. It was true enough. A senior hospital administrator arrived, flanked by people who did not wear badges. Voices lowered as they spoke to one another. Papers were signed. Phones rang again. The men in scrubs were gone, as if they had never been there. One of the dark-jacketed figures approached her once more. He handed her back her badge. "You dropped this," he said. She looked at it, then clipped it back onto her chest. "I need your statement," he added. "Later." She met his eyes. "You'll get it," he nodded. No demand, no threat. They left without ceremony. Room 16 was sealed again, this time with a different kind of security. The nurse returned to her patients. She restarted 4S. She checked vitals. She reassured families with careful words that revealed nothing. She logged events in neutral language. By the time the sun began to rise somewhere far above He building, the ICU had returned to routine. Almost. A doctor stopped her near the nurses' station. "You saved a lot of people tonight." She considered that. "I did my job," she said. It was the last thing she said about it. Morning arrived without ceremony. There were no windows on ICU East, but the hospital still felt the shift. The night sounds softened, voices lowered naturally. The urgency that had carried everyone through the dark hours thinned into exhaustion. The nurse finished her charting. Her notes were precise, clinical, nothing extraneous. Lockdown procedures, equipment fluctuations, patient outcomes. She did not name the men. She did not describe confrontations. She wrote only what could be proven. Truth, reduced to what survived review. At 6:12, the day shift began to arrive. Fresh scrubs, coffee cups, sleep still clinging to faces. They sensed something had happened. People always did, but no one announced it. ICU culture absorbed trauma quietly. "You asked later, in pieces, if you asked at all." The nurse gave handoff at bed 7. "Stable through the night," she said. "Watch his pressure around, mid-morning." The incoming nurse nodded, grateful for the clarity. No questions. At the nurse's station, the charge nurse from the night shift stood with her, shoulders slumped now that responsibility had loosened its grip. "They're saying it'll be reviewed at the executive level," the charge nurse said. "Risk management, legal, everyone." The nurse nodded. "They asked about you," the charge nurse added. "Your background, and they were told you're an ICU nurse." That answer had been sufficient. A man in a suit waited near the elevators. Hospital administration. By the cut of him. He watched the floor with practiced detachment, clipboard tucked under his arm. When the nurse passed, he stopped her. "I just wanted to thank you," he said, "for keeping things calm." She met his eyes briefly, saw the limits of his understanding, the boundaries of what he was allowed to know. "You're welcome," she said. That was the entire exchange. She went to the locker room and changed slowly. Her hands shook slightly now. Not fear, fatigue, the delayed invoice for the night's choices. She folded her scrubs carefully. Habit. In the mirror, she looked the same. No visible mark of what had happened. No sign that she had stood between a sealed door and men who did not hesitate. She tied her hair down again before leaving. No reason. Muscle memory. At the exit she passed the dark-jacketed man from earlier. He stood with another, speaking quietly. They stopped when they saw her. "We're done here," he said. "You won't be contacted again." She nodded. A pause. "If you ever need—" he began. She shook her head once. Not unkindly. "I won't," she said. He accepted that. Outside, the morning air was cold and clean. Ambulances came and went. Families smoked across the street, unaware of how close the night had come to breaking open. She walked to her car and sat for a moment before starting it. The hospital loomed behind her. Concrete, glass, indifferent. It would continue. It always did. Inside, on the ICU floor, machines kept breathing for people who could not. Nurses moved quietly between beds. Life held on. No one would put her name on a report that mattered. No one would tell the story correctly. That was fine. She drove home as the sun rose. Traffic building. NG around her. Another anonymous car among many. By the time the city was fully awake, the ICU lockdown was already being rewritten into something safer, smaller, forgettable. The nurse slept, and when she returned for her next shift, she would clip on her badge, check her patients, and be invisible again, exactly where she belonged. Morning did not arrive all at once. It crept in through routine. Shift change voices replaced whispers. Clipboards changed hands. Fresh gloves snapped on. Coffee cups appeared near the nurses' station, their steam rising slowly into air that still felt tense, as if the building itself had not fully relaxed. The ICU looked the same. That was the lie hospitals told best. The nurse finished documenting the last patient from her assignment. Her notes were clean, clinical, nothing emotional, no mention of locked doors or unfamiliar men, only what the system could absorb without rejecting. She closed the chart and stood still for a moment, not resting. Listening. The machines were steady now. Ventilators breathed without interruption. Alarms stayed quiet unless they were supposed to sound. The floor had accepted the morning the way it always did, by pretending the night had been ordinary. She walked one last pass down the corridor. Bed 7 first. The elderly man was unchanged, stable, alive. She adjusted the blanket slightly, the way she always did, tucking it just under his shoulder so it would not pull against the tubing when he shifted. "Still here," she murmured, not expecting an answer. Room by room she checked what she no longer needed to check. Not because it was required, but because leaving without doing it felt wrong. In room 9, the patient who had nearly coded was sleeping peacefully now. A nurse from the day shift stood beside the bed, eyes focused, unaware of how close the margin had been hours earlier. In room 16 the door remained sealed. Different locks now, different authority. 2 men stood outside, unobtrusive, pretending to be nothing more than part of hospital logistics. They did not look at her as she passed. They did not need to. She did not slow. She reached the nurse's station just as the day charge nurse arrived. The woman scanned the board, paused, then looked up. "Busy night?" she asked. The nurse considered the question. "Yes," she said, "but manageable." That was true. The night had not been about chaos. It had been about control, about keeping the center from collapsing while pressure closed in from all sides. Manageable meant the system had survived. A resident approached hesitantly. Younger, still carrying the edges of adrenaline. "I just wanted to say, thank you," he said, "for keeping everyone focused." She nodded once. "That's the job." He looked like he wanted to say more. He didn't. People rarely knew what to say to quiet competence once it had revealed itself. At 6:48, hospital administration arrived in force. Suits instead of scrubs, neutral expressions, clipboards and phones. They spoke in low voices, careful not to draw attention. One of them glanced down the corridor toward the sealed room, then looked away. The nurse was not included. That too was deliberate. She returned to the locker room. The fluorescent lights hummed softly. Someone had left a locker door open. She closed it without thinking. Order mattered, even her E. She changed out of her scrubs slowly, folded them neatly, placed them in her bag. Her hands trembled slightly now. Not fear. Aftershock. The body always collected its payment when it was safe to do so. She sat on the bench for a moment, elbows resting on her knees, breathing evenly. She did not replay the night. She did not second-guess decisions. That part of her life had ended years ago. Outside the locker room, footsteps paused. One of the men from earlier stood there. Dark jacket, no insignia, neutral face. "We'll need a written statement," he said. "Not today." She nodded. "You'll get it." He hesitated. "Your actions prevented escalation." She looked at him. "They prevented harm." He accepted the correction. "You won't be named," he added. "Officially." She almost smiled. "That's fine." He studied her for a moment longer. There was something like curiosity there, not about what she had done, but about why she was here, in this place, wearing this badge. He did not ask. He stepped aside and let her pass. The hospital exit opened with a soft mechanical sound. Morning air hit her face, cold, clean, indifferent. Ambulances idled. Stretchers rolled in. A family argued quietly near the curb. The world had continued while the ICU had been sealed away from it. She walked to her car, sat inside without starting it. For a few seconds, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it, the door she had sealed, the decision she had made knowing there would be no backup if she was wrong, the certainty that had carried her through because doubt would have killed people. Then she started the engine. Traffic was already building. Radios played. People complained about workdays beginning too soon. She merged into it unnoticed. By mid-morning, the hospital would issue an internal memo, carefully worded, vague, emphasizing system resilience, praising teamwork, avoiding specifics. By evening, the story would already be shrinking. By next week, it would be gone, and that was acceptable. Because hospitals did not need heroes. They needed people who showed up, recognized danger early, and stood in the way without asking to be seen. She drove home as the sun climbed higher. She slept. And when she returned for her next shift, she would wear the same scrubs, clip on the same badge, and walk the same quiet corridors. No one would look twice, which meant everything was working.